kind of makes sense because people, when they're drinking, they don't lose their ability to do calculations, their visual abilities continue, they can still, their body still functions. But what they can't do is they can't connect the frontal lobes, the executive function, or the willpower area of the brain with the part of the brain that's driving the drinking, the craving part, the subconscious lower part of the brain that is more survival mode. And it's that part of the brain that is driven to drink alcohol to excess. That's the part that gets addicted. That's the part that drives humans to do automatic things that humans are designed to do. So once we heal the brain, the connections improve and people can take that willpower, and it's enough to stop the behavior of drinking too much. I mentioned that the brain volume increases by 2%. And so what my study was at NIH, you can't see, it's blurry back here, but there's a picture of the brain that was on a magazine cover that a journal of lipid research that was sort of my 5 minutes of fame when I was an NIH researcher. And it shows that the brain uptake of the omega-3 fatty acid called DHA, one of the long chain fats that's critical for brain function, is just sucked up like crazy when somebody stops drinking. That's one of the nutrients that the brain really needs to recover. And of course, if you're aware of some of the nutritional theories today, people are often really deficient in omega-3. They don't eat enough fish and they eat too much of the other kinds of fats that interfere with that. So that's one of the things that I've always found it's so helpful for folks, is to eat excess amount of omega-3 to kind of make up for the last decades of lousy eating. And that allows people to connect their frontal lobe, their willpower, with their craving centers. And that sometimes is really helpful for recovery. So that's sort of a nutshell. Katie, that's what answer your question. I got long-winded because it's so much fun to talk about, but.
No, it does for sure. And I always promote, your knowledge and research about the high dose omega-3s. And one question that's coming up for me that I know a lot of people ask me is, well, what about the mercury? I know that's kind of been, what's your thoughts on that?
So it's blown out of proportion. Sure, there's mercury in fish, unfortunately, but the other thing in fish is selenium, and selenium helps protect against mercury toxicity. Fish is so important for our diets that to look at one component of it and say this is bad makes it's not really a realistic way to look at it. So we could stop drinking water because there's pollutants in the drinking water that we have. It doesn't make sense. You can't stop fish. And what the studies show is that when you look at omega-3 fatty acids and cardiovascular health in men, for instance, it's associated. More omega-3 in your bloodstream, the more likely you are to survive a heart attack or not to have a heart attack. Well, if you look at mercury, the more mercury you have in your bloodstream, the more likely you are to survive also. And why is that? Well, because the people that have been eating fish to get the omega-3 also have been eating the mercury in the fish. So it's crazy, but the mercury is a bad actor, and we should recommend people not pollute with mercury. That's why we are concerned about some of the pollutants that contain mercury. It's definitely bad on childhood development, but the dose in fish, in most fish, is outweighed by the benefits of the omega-3. So the study that was really seminal in making people worry about giving, for instance, pregnant women fish, comes from a study in the Seychelles Islands where people were eating pilot whale, which is a carnivorous fish that eats lots of smaller fish. So you got high concentrations of mercury. And even with the high concentration of mercury in the diet, what they found was not that the children were retarded in some way or had some obvious deficit. What they found was that the children, when tested with sophisticated neuropsychophysiological tests, they could detect a difference in the children that had lots of mercury. Okay, it was not something that was obvious to people. And then the recommendation was based not on not eating that much fish, but eating 10 times less fish than that, or because of the safety factors that are put into dietary recommendations. And so the recommendation came out, well, women shouldn't eat fish during pregnancy, or maybe max one fish meal, which is, sure, it's safe, you won't get mercury, but you don't get the omega-3s and the other nutrients in fish. There's all kinds of nutrients in fish and seafood. And of course, the baby brains are made of the omega-3s. That's what they need for development. And so that's why I think it's overblown. Maybe that's more information than you needed to know, but that's sort of where we are with the mercury story.
If I can chime in real quick, John,
Sure.
Dr. Umhau, I started.
John is fine. John is fine, Chris. That's
I like calling you Dr. Umhau, but I'll call you John every now and then. After our last talk, when I had you on the podcast several months ago, and we talked about a lot about high dose fish oil and omega-3s,
Right.
I started consuming more fish. And obviously I'm not I don't say I'm in recovery from alcohol addiction. I'm 7 or almost 8 years out of that trap, but I'm in perpetual, ongoing, never ending optimization. And I do sometimes work too hard. I get sleepless nights that I shouldn't have for, I like to stay up and do work, and life's exciting. I don't want it to end. So I end up sometimes with brain fog. And I found that high dose fish oil, in this case, I think it's Nordic Naturals, and I have no affiliation with their brand, actually. It comes in a glass bottle. It's really annoying to open when I get it, but I'm excited because I think it's anchovies and maybe herring and other smaller fish with lower mercury content. And from what I recall from my own research, you can tell me if this is true, but if you stick to sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring, then you're maybe minimizing your mercury. And obviously those aren't the only fish to be eaten, but as a rule of thumb, they tend to have lower mercury than, say, swordfish or big tuna or other predatory giant fish. I love fish, so I also started eating more fish as well.
Right.
And I noticed my brain fog dissipated, my mood. I mean, I feel like superhuman most of the time. Of course, there's always confounding variables, so who knows? But I appreciated that. And I think I recall our friend, well, I've not met her, but we've discussed her work in the past, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, discussing at some point that one of the reasons cilantro may be traditionally served with fish is that there are compounds in it that may bind to heavy metals and perhaps remove them from the body. So I try to get cilantro when I can. Some people hate cilantro for genetic reasons, I suppose, but I lucked out there. And I do take spirulina and chlorella as little tablets, and I have no idea, there's no short-term effect, but I had also read that may be helpful in binding to heavy metals. So I'm not sure, I haven't really dug into the research there, but that's my own recent experiment on increasing omega-3s. And even almost 8 years alcohol-free and addiction-free, at this point, I noticed a benefit.
It's the brain fog is what people describe going away with fish oil. Over and over again, people say, I just think clearer, doc. And that was my experience when I started using omega-3s. When I did my research, I was not into supplements at all when I was started at NIH, because I just felt like, well, we get enough good nutrients in our diet. I eat pretty well. But after I realized, well, we've been Americanized. Our diets are full of omega-6 fat, which is what you get in anything that's fattened in the feedlots in Chicago, or anything that comes in a jar that has soybean oil in it. I realized that those kind of fats really made my need for omega-3 supplements go way up. Now I'm like you. I think the best advice is to eat lots of fish. Supplements are great, but there's other stuff in fish that we can't really we don't know about yet. We know there's selenium and iodine, all kinds of healthy things in fish, and certainly the spirulina. You can have other phytochemicals and so forth in the spirulina and the cilantro and so forth. So I recommend just eating the best diet you can. Unfortunately, Americans get so much omega-6 fat that their bodies are overwhelming. This fat is kind of interesting because the omega-6 and the omega-3s are almost identical, and they go to the same places in the body. So if you eat a lot of soybean oil and animals fed soybeans and corn, your tissue is going to be made of omega-6 fat, versus if you're eating lots of omega-3 fish if you're an Eskimo, if you're a Japanese person, your body is completely different composition because it has omega-3 instead of the omega-6. So you can actually take someone from Japan and take someone from Iceland and tell where they come from based on the muscle composition of their body. And since we're more like the folks that have lots of omega-6, we need much more omega-3 to make up for the years of omega-6. So the half-life is 2.5 years. That's one of the things that I measured in my studies. And that means that you can eat lots of omega-3 today, Chris, but you'll still be seeing a benefit, for like 10 years or so, something like that, which is really different than other things that we do for nutrition.
That's so fascinating. So John, what do you see with the patients who are on the Sinclair method who add fish oils, just adding fish oil to that protocol? What's common patient experiences that you've seen?
Well, what's really fascinating is I've seen all kind of folks that are suffering from alcohol problems. When I was working with homeless, the diets were so lousy, nobody ate fish. So they would not be able to see me on my private practice. People who look up the alcoholrecoverymedicine.com website and they find me and make an appointment. They're folks that are pretty high functioning. They got their emotions and their brain working pretty well, and those people, they eat really well relatively. So they've already on a good path. But sometimes if they don't eat any fish, well, most of the times when they come to me, they'll still benefit from the omega-3. Their brain will clear. They just feel like Chris said, the brain fog lifts. But also what happens is that they may be doing the Sinclair method. Oftentimes they're doing it very carefully. They're not missing doses. They maybe have been doing it for years. But if I talk to them carefully, I say, well, wait a minute, you don't eat very much fish. Why don't we try omega-3s at some of the doses that we've used for bipolar disorder, which is a lot higher than is recommended for just normal supplementation. And at those doses, sometimes people all of a sudden just reach extinction. They said, I don't need to drink today. I'm fine. Or they just are able to cut down rapidly. It's fascinating. I've been amazed. I thought that the omega-3s were helpful, but I didn't know how really powerful they can be sometimes until I started my private practice and recommending these high doses. So unfortunately, we don't have the research to really back that up directly. We know that omega-3s are important. We know that they're deficient in people who drink too much, and we know that they're harmless, but unfortunately, we don't have the data that shows that high doses will stop craving or help people get to where they want to in their goals.